So I think the first thing is, one thing that I see a lot in classrooms and working with K-12 teachers is when we say the word assessment, we automatically think it means test. And that, it turns out, is kind of a limiting way of thinking about assessment. It keeps us from understanding how rich assessment can be a part of the process of teaching and learning. So assessment is really bigger than just a test. Assessment involves at least 3 different things, any kind of assessment. One, some kind of learning you want to learn about, right? Or a learning target that we want to collect information about our students' learning in relationship to. The next thing assessment involves is collecting of data about learning in relationship to that target. The third thing it always involves is analyzing and interpreting that data in relationship to the target, right? So if we just start with a test instead of the learning, then we've started at the wrong place with assessment. And that's part of why we lose track of assessment being such a critical component of the teaching and learning process. Now, formative versus summative. Again, we so frequently think of formative assessment as a particular type of test, when in fact, formative assessment isn't a test at all. In fact, it's really a process of reasoning from evidence about where our learners are and making decisions about adjusting what's happening in process or in the formation of learning. And that's what it means to be formative. So if all assessment involves a target, collecting data about the target, analyzing and interpreting that data, formative assessment involves using that interpretation to adjust what's going on in the moment. Now that moment can be big or small, right? And the person doing the adjusting could be the teacher or the students. So the nice thing about formative assessment that's also sort of become part of how we think about it and become part of how we define it is it's only formative if the learners are actively engaged in some aspect of formative assessment as well. I love to draw on the research on how people learn as kind of a way of pulling out how do we get to formative assessment being good practice. And one of the key findings from that, from the research on how people learn and from, I like the National Research Council publication, How People Learn Brain-Mind Experience in School. But one of the big findings of over the last really 20 to 30 years in learning and cognitive science is that not only is metacognition important, and if we think about what do we mean by metacognition, thinking about our thinking, it's important that our learners learn how to do that. We want learners who are able to step back, think about, am I getting this or not? And if I am, what happened to help me get it? And if I'm not, what can I do differently to get it? Right? It's that simple. We want learners who have that skill because that's part of being able to be a lifelong learner. So we want learners to have metacognitive strategies. It turns out that formative assessment is almost synonymous with developing metacognitive strategies in our learners if we think about it the way we just talked about it, right? It's helping our learners understand what's the target for my learning. It's helping our learners, we collect data or they collect data, and it's helping our learners interpret what does that tell me about where I am in relationship to the target I'm trying to get to. And then the action that we want our learners to take is action that closes the gap between where they're trying to get to and where they are now. That in and of itself is metacognition. It's also what it means to be a learner, to be able to do that. That's what I would say about what is formative assessment. Then let's talk about how does it play out in classrooms? How do we know it's happening? The kinds of things that we see, I think help. If we can figure out what we would see if it were happening, then I think it helps us figure out not just naming and defining it, but knowing what it really means or understanding it, right? And part of what we would see is we would see teachers, while they have plans for activity that is geared towards meeting specific targets, they're willing and able to make adjustments to that activity based on where their learners are. And it's not just based on this once every 3 months check we do with this interim test that we give because the district said we had to, or even a once-a-month test. It's actually frequent checks, things that happen on an ongoing basis during a lesson about where are my learners right now. Do I really need to start? I'll tell you an example. I was in a 2nd grade classroom last week, so this illustrates this, I think, pretty well. She was helping students, her learning target was learning about comparing numbers. She was helping them understand the concept of less than, greater than, or equal to. And she started by wanting them to understand that in relationship to 2 single-digit numbers. She thought that the next layer of advancing them and getting them to a further understanding of that would be two-digit numbers, because that was a more advanced concept for her kids, and then equations to numbers. So 2 plus 3 is less than, greater than, or equal to 5 or 7 or whatever. And then the final level of difficulty she wanted them to get to was comparing two equations, right? So she had this notion that comparing less than, greater than, or equal to was something her kids needed to understand, but she wanted to figure out the degree to which they already understood that as she was entering into this lesson or series of lessons in this unit. So she introduced the concept with her students, checked on their understanding of the basic terminology and symbols as she was introducing the concept, and then what she did was great. She had 4 problems comparing single-digit numbers, 4 problems comparing double-digit numbers, 4 problems comparing a number to an equation, and 4 problems comparing 2 equations. And she asked her students to see what they could answer in that order, right? And then she had this shocking discovery. All of her kids already knew how to compare 2 single-digit numbers with complete accuracy. The vast majority of her students could already compare 2-digit numbers. The place where she started seeing students fall off in understanding this was when they got to the equation to the number part of it. She had fully intended to start the next class session with introducing single-digit number comparison. And because of what she did, she realized that if she did that, she would be losing all of her kids. It would be a complete waste of her time and theirs. So she didn't do that. She made a different choice. That's an example of formative assessment happening in an actual classroom. Is that okay? Now, formative assessment also has this dimension of the learner using information about their learning to make adjustments to what they choose to do. This is a little bit more complicated and probably takes longer to put in place and make part of regular practice. But I certainly see educators able to step into those kinds of practices very readily in all grade levels and across all content areas as well. So one piece of that is for the learner to be the agent in the formative assessment process. They actually have to know what the learning target is. So a key first practice that we have to have educators get into using is clarifying what the target is, not just for themselves so they know what it is, but for their learner. So how do we know if that has happened in a classroom? I have a classic example from my own life. My stepdaughter, when she was in elementary school, and she's 14 now, so I can talk about her elementary experience without fear of retribution. She came home one day and she was telling me about this great thing they were doing in math class where they had turtles and they were working on a computer screen and moving objects, and I don't remember all the details of the activity, but she was pretty excited about it. She had a lot to say about it, which is fun. I said, well, that's so cool. Tell me more. And she was telling me. I said, so what do you think you were learning when you were doing that? What do you think the point of that activity was? And she says, I don't know. Ask my teacher. She's in charge of my learning. Oh, what a moment. Isn't that the epitome of what we don't want our learners to think? That they don't have any agency or power, they're just told to do activities and they don't know what the point is? Here's the opposite. My niece, when she was just starting kindergarten, she came home to my mother's house one day and I happened to stop by and I got to see her, within a few weeks of kindergarten. And I said, Hanukkah, what great thing did you learn in school today? And she goes, we were learning about beginning and ending sounds of words and how to put them together. I was like, really? What were you doing to learn about that? She goes, oh, we got these beginning sounds, pa, and these ending sounds, and we figured out how to put them together with pen, or pa, ig, pig, and she went through this whole thing where she was like standing on one side of the room, running to the other side, talking about how they figured out, how they started getting the beginning and ending sounds, how putting those sounds together gave them words. The great thing about that was not that she was so animated and excited about the activity, but she really was. What was great about it is she knew exactly why she was doing it. It was totally clear to her. So if we want learners to be agents in their own learning process, they have to know what the target is and what the purpose is for the activities that they're engaged in. My name is Julie Oxenford O'Brien. I direct the Center for Transforming Learning and Teaching. That is a center within the School of Education at the University of Colorado in Denver. What we do is our mission is really about transforming assessment practice in ways that develop our learners. And we do that through a variety of types of work. We've been the lead partner working with the State Department of Education for the last 5 years, rolling out the Colorado Growth Model in Colorado, and also how does data influence planning and planning processes that are data-driven. We've also, for about 10 years, been focused on working with schools and districts around classroom assessment practice and making it more meaningful.